Have you ever stood at the edge of a choice that would change everything? This is the story of Persephone. Not just a myth, but the reason seasons exist. A tale of transformation, not captivity. Of a queen, not a victim. Welcome to Sleepless in Olympus. Tonight's story begins beneath the surface. Beneath the grasses and roots, the hills and harvests, where the earth opens like a doorway and calls a girl by name. We'll wander shadowed meadows, torchlit caverns and halls of silence, to follow a daughter and a mother, a king who ruled over endings, and the choice that reshaped the world. This is the story of Hades and Persephone, not of villains, but of seasons, not of loss, but of becoming. If stories like this bring you peace, you're welcome to like this video or subscribe, but only if it feels right. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's comfort in knowing we're all drifting off together, across cities, time zones, quiet bedrooms. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan, or let the night air settle around you. Feel the weight of the day sink away, like petals falling into dark soil. Take one slow breath in, and let it go. The tale that follows is ancient, whispered by winds in barren fields, carried in the silence of winter. Close your eyes if you'd like, and come with me now to the world before the pomegranate, before the underworld, before the earth opened and a girl stepped into her power. Chapter 1. The Upper World. In the fertile hills of ancient Sicily, where sunlight poured like honey over golden meadows, Persephone ran barefoot through tall grass, the hem of her green linen dress stained with dew. Her laughter echoed through the valley, chased by the songs of cicadas and the hush of wind against olive leaves. To the world she was Kore, the maiden, daughter of Demeter, goddess of harvest and a symbol of untouched spring. But beneath that title, Persephone was a young woman shaped by more than flowers and sunshine. She longed not only to bring life to the world, but to understand it. She longed to see what grew in the shadows as well as the light. Demeter watched from a grove above, her hand resting on the trunk of an almond tree. Her gaze, though soft, was edged with worry. She loved her daughter fiercely as any mother might. But in the chambers of her divine heart, there was fear, a knowledge that innocence, once questioned, could never be returned. Stay close, she had warned that morning. The earth listens more than you know. But Persephone had only smiled. I want to hear what it says. Each morning began like this, a gentle blessing of warmth, a mother's caution, and the flicker of something unspoken between them. In her meadow, Persephone walked among poppies and crocuses, bending to touch petals, murmuring to bees. Yet her eyes always drifted to the horizon, beyond the trees, beyond what she were allowed to see. Later, as the sun crested its peak, the nymphs arrived. They sang and danced, weaving crowns of iris and lily. Persephone joined them, graceful but half present, her thoughts adrift. "Do you dream, Kore?" one asked, lying back in the grass. "Yes," Persephone replied, "but not always of here." "Where then?" She hesitated. "Sometimes I dream of caves, of stillness, of roots curling through stone." The others fell quiet. The underworld was not a subject for song, not in spring. "I don't fear it," Persephone added, "but I don't understand it either." "Why should you?" came a new voice, Demeter's, stepping into the circle. "The dark is not for you." Persephone rose. "Why is it there then, if not to be known?" Demeter's face changed, not angry, not scolding, but guarded. "Because some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. That night, while the others slept in beds of moss and flowered silk, Persephone sat awake beside the fire. She held a stone in her palm, a smooth black river stone she had found near the boundary of the meadow. Cold, heavy, unlike the others. She turned it over and over, the firelight dancing in its curves. Why had the earth given her this? And why did it make her feel seen? In the silence, a wind stirred the ashes, and for the first time Persephone did not wish for spring to last forever. The next day dawned cool and clear, with mist curling over the hills like silk unravelling. Demeter rose early, as always, coaxing warmth into the soil with her hands. Wheat pushed through the earth in tidy lines. Almond blossoms swelled. She worked silently, but her thoughts were loud. She had hoped motherhood would anchor her, make her less restless, more patient. But Persephone was not a still child. She'd been born under a wandering star. At breakfast, Persephone stirred honey into barley milk, her gaze far off again. Demeter watched her, wondering how long the hearth would hold her. "What are you thinking of, little bud?" she asked. Persephone blinked and smiled faintly. "A place where things grow without sun." Demeter's lips tightened. Some things should not grow. Later, as Demeter attended offerings in the village shrine, Persephone returned to the meadow, but this time she didn't stop at the edge. She stepped into the line of trees beyond the boundary, just a little, just to see. It wasn't rebellion, she told herself, only curiosity. The path beneath her was narrow and uneven. Brambles scratched at her arms, the light dimmed, but the air was rich, heavy with moss and mushrooms and the scent of wet stone. Birdsong fell away. In its place, stillness, and in that stillness, something listening. Persephone paused by a hollow tree. Something inside her stirred, not fear, but recognition, like a dream remembered, or a name nearly spoken. A sound cracked behind her. She turned sharply, only a deer stepping between the trees. She exhaled and laughed, though the sound felt small. Then the ground trembled, only slightly, like a breath from beneath the soil. The deer froze. Persephone did too, and then it passed. She stepped back, her pulse steady but heightened. Enough for today, she decided, enough for now. That evening Demeter said nothing. She could smell the damp bark on Persephone's skin. But to name it would make it real, and some things, some truths, were better left sleeping. For now. But the earth had noticed, and it does not forget those who step where they are not meant to. As summer neared, Persephone's restlessness grew. She still walked among the blooms and sang with the nymphs, but her heart was no longer anchored to the songs of spring. Something had awakened in her, a need she could not name. Demeter felt it too. One morning she brought Persephone to the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley. Below, golden fields rolled in waves. Above, clouds drifted like soft-winged birds. "This land breathes because of you," Demeter said. "It flourishes under your feet. The people depend on it." On us, Persephone looked out, but her expression was unreadable. "You speak as if I'm part of the harvest," she murmured, "as if I belong to the cycle, not beside it." Demeter placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are part of the cycle. That's what it means to be divine." "No," Persephone whispered, "that's what it means to be caged." Demeter flinched, pulling her hand back. "You're not trapped." "I can't go beyond the meadow without your shadow following me. I only want you safe." "Then why am I afraid to ask for more?" They stood in silence, mother and daughter, the distance between them now more than physical. Later that week, a shepherd arrived at the village shrine, bearing news. Sheep had vanished near the ravine. The earth, he said, had groaned and split. A sound like thunder had rolled from beneath the hills. Demeter's eyes darkened. She left the villagers quickly, returning to the sacred grove with haste. That night she scattered poppy seeds in a circle and whispered to the roots. She begged the soil to sleep, to be still, to forget. But the earth was waking, and it had already heard Persephone's voice. The next morning Demeter sent Persephone out with the nymphs to gather fresh flowers for a new altar. The sun was bright, the breeze was kind. But beneath the calm there was tension, like a string drawn taut. They wandered far that day, farther than usual. Persephone led the way, following the trail of Narcissus blooming out of season. She didn't notice the nymph slowing behind her, or the way the meadow sloped toward a dark hollow veiled in mist. She only saw the flower. It grew taller than the others, its petals gleaming like pearls. She reached for it, and the earth opened. At first there was only silence. Persephone stood frozen, her hand outstretched toward the Narcissus. Beneath her the meadow quivered, not with violence, but with intention, as if the ground had been waiting, listening, choosing its moment. A seam split the earth. Cracks raced outward in all directions, and from the depth below a wind surged upward, scented with ash and myrrh, wild and ancient. The nymphs screamed and scattered like leaves. But Persephone did not run. She stared into the widening chasm as the petals of the Narcissus trembled in her grasp. The flower had not broken. It was still rooted. A low thunder rumbled from beneath the world, and then, out of shadow and smoke, rose a chariot of obsidian, pulled by horses black as void, their manes coiled with flame. The figure who stood at their helm wore a cloak darker than midnight. A crown of iron thorns circled his brow. Hades. His eyes met Persephone's, not cruel, not soft, but filled with an unreadable gravity. A mirror, perhaps, to her own curiosity. He said no word, only extended a hand. The wind roared louder. The grass around her bent low, as if bowing. In her chest her heart beat not with fear, but with knowing. A certainty she could not explain, and she took his hand. The world swallowed them both. Far away, in the sacred grove, Demeter dropped her offering bowl. Pomegranate seeds scattered across the altar, rolling into the grass like spilled blood. Something had broken. She ran, faster than mortal wind, her feet barely touching the earth. The trees whispered in dread as she passed. The birds ceased their song. She reached the meadow. The flower still stood, but there was no sign of her daughter, only scorched grass and a single, smooth black stone. Demeter fell to her knees. Her scream shook the sky. The clouds turned, the wind shifted, and far below, the earth began to dim. In the underworld, the chariots slowed as they passed between towering gates of bone and basalt. Persephone's eyes adjusted to the gloom. It was not darkness, it was density, a kind of silence that spoke. She had thought the underworld would feel cold, dead, but it breathed, it moved, its shadows had stories. Hades said nothing. He did not pull her, did not restrain her, but he watched. And Persephone, who had once only danced in sunlit fields, now stepped down into night. Unafraid, the descent had begun. Demeter wandered the meadow until night swallowed the hills. Her calls for Persephone echoed into emptiness. The grass did not answer. The bees had fled. The flowers had curled into themselves like frightened children. She knelt where the earth had opened. Her hands sank into the soil, fingers searching for warmth, for a heartbeat, for proof that her daughter still touched this world. But the earth was still, and for the first time in her immortal memory, Demeter felt powerless, She stood and lifted her hands to the sky. Her voice, once sweet as summer rain, rose in a cry that shattered clouds. "Bring her back," thunder answered, but no god replied, not even Zeus. Across the world the change was immediate. Fields began to wither, rivers slowed, livestock bore stillborn young. The heat of summer remained, but the life within it dulled, as if colour had drained from the season. Mortals whispered prayers to Demeter, but the goddess didn't hear them. She wandered, she searched, and where she walked, growth fled. Persephone, meanwhile, walked through the corridors of the underworld. Torchlight flickered across stone carved with names. Spirits drifted past her, not menacing, not mournful, just present, watching. She felt their weight, not in fear, but in gravity. These were not shadows. They were memories, choices, echoes of lives once made. She stopped beside a fountain that flowed upward, the water falling in reverse. "This is not what I expected," she said aloud. "It rarely is," came a voice. Hades stood beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Why me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured around them. "Because you listened." To what? To the world when it whispered. To what lies beneath beauty. Persephone turned back to the fountain. "I don't belong here." "No," Hades agreed, "but you're not afraid to be here." That truth sat between them like a candle, small, flickering, but unflinching. In the mortal world, Demeter reached the gates of Olympus and pounded the marble until it cracked. Gods peered from behind veils of silk and smoke. Some wept, some turned away. Finally Zeus emerged. "Where is she?" Demeter demanded. Zeus said nothing. Demeter's eyes burned. "You knew." He didn't deny it. "She's not a thing to be bartered," she hissed. "I did not trade her," Zeus replied, "but I did not stop what was destined." Demeter clenched her fists. "Then I will unmake destiny." And with that she descended, not to the underworld, but to the mortal realm. There she let her sorrow shape the seasons. Wheat turned brittle. Trees stood bare. Even the sky seemed dim. The world had lost its maiden, and in its grief it too began to change. Far below, Persephone stood before a garden unlike any she had seen. Not dead, not bright, glowing faintly with blossoms shaped like sighs. She reached for a vine of ghost-white ivy and let it wrap around her wrist. Something within her stirred, not fear, not regret, but the first bloom of becoming. She did not yet know the name of what she would become, only that she was no longer just the maiden. And above, far above, the last leaf of autumn fell from its branch. The upper world would wait, and the story was only beginning. Persephone wandered deeper into the twilight garden. Vines shimmered with dew that never dried. Some blossoms pulsed softly, as if dreaming. Others swayed gently, though no wind passed through. She stopped at a twisted tree of silver bark. Its branches hung with lantern fruits that glowed pale gold. She touched one gently, and it warmed beneath her hand. "I didn't think anything grew here," she murmured. Hades stood beside her again, as if summoned by thought. "It grows differently," he said. "Not in defiance of death, but because of it." Persephone looked up at him. "Is this place only sorrow? Number it is memory. It is balance. Without it, life above would have no shape." She turned to the lantern fruit. "And if I stayed?" "You would change," he said, "as all things here do." She didn't respond. Not yet. But her silence wasn't refusal. It was reflection. In the mortal realm, Demeter stood in the centre of a fallow field. Her hands were caked with clay. Her eyes had not closed in days. She raised her arms and spoke a word known only to the oldest seeds. The ground split, not violently, but with purpose. Roots rose and twisted into brittle knots. The wheat withered in its cradle. The sky, though sunlit, dimmed to an unnatural shade. "If you will not return her," Demeter said to the air, to the sky, to Olympus, "then no life shall rise until she walks again in light." A pact had been made, not in council, not with consent, but with the fury of a mother scorned, and all the earth would bear its weight. For life above and life below were now bound by longing, and the seasons had begun their spiral. Chapter 2. The Descent. Persephone stood at the edge of the chasm, the scent of crushed narcissus still clinging to her fingers. Around her the meadow lay still, too still, as though the land itself held its breath. The darkness below yawned wide and patient, not violent but expectant. The horses had vanished into mist, and so had Hades. There was no visible path, no stairs, just the steady hush of unseen wind spiralling upward from the depths. She stepped forward, not out of compulsion, but choice. Her bare foot touched the loose edge of soil, and without fanfare the ground gave way. Persephone did not fall. She descended. As though the earth had simply parted to allow her passage, the soil folded around her, gentle as silk. She was cradled in coolness, the dim light above fading gradually, like twilight deepening into dusk. Her eyes adjusted, her breath slowed. The passage narrowed, and then opened. She found herself in a tunnel lit by soft veins of glowing stone. Amber light flickered across walls carved with vines and names, some ancient, some recent, all familiar in a way that stirred her chest. She walked, her fingers trailing along the markings. The tunnel pulsed faintly beneath her feet. It was alive, or had once been, or remembered being alive. She was not afraid, but she was not unchanged. Each step she took seemed to pull something from her. Warmth from her cheeks, the cadence of sunlight from her hair, not erasing, transforming, unfolding. She did not resist. She passed alcoves where spirits rested like fog, curled and humming in silence. She passed fountains that trickled sideways, waterfalls that fell upward. Logic held no dominion here, only memory, only gravity, and she was being pulled toward something vast, toward the god she had followed into silence. After what might have been hours or heartbeats, Persephone emerged into a vast chamber veiled in twilight. The ceiling arched so high above that it seemed to disappear into mist. Pillars of obsidian rose around her like the trunks of ancient trees, their surfaces etched with constellations that shimmered faintly, though no stars shone in this world. The floor beneath her feet was smooth stone, polished by time and passage. It curved in spirals and symbols that pulsed faintly under her steps. She felt the energy, not as threat but as memory, as invitation. From the far end of the hall a figure approached, his footfall silent, his presence immense. Hades. He did not speak, neither did she. They stood a few paces apart, watching each other. There was no force between them, no chain or crown offered, only the recognition of what had passed, and what might follow. "I thought you would vanish," she said softly, the words slipping like breath into the air. "I do not summon without invitation," he replied. "You mean I chose this?" "You reached for the flower. You stepped through the veil. The underworld opens only to those who are willing to see." She turned away, unsure if his words soothed her or unsettled her. "Is this a prison?" she asked. Hades' gaze did not waver. "No, but neither is it a sanctuary. It is a mirror." What you find here will not be what you flee, but what you carry. Persephone's breath caught. She had thought this place might hold answers, or at least secrets worth stealing. Instead, it offered only her own reflection, scattered across stone and shadow. "Come," Hades said gently. "There is more to see." He turned, and after a moment's pause she followed. They walked in silence, passing statues of forgotten gods and doorways sealed with weeping ivy. They passed a corridor where laughter echoed, not cruel, but distant, like the echo of joy remembered too late. Persephone looked over her shoulder. The path behind them was gone. No footsteps, no dust, only forward. They came at last to a second chamber, round, low, and warm with amber light. A tree grew in its centre, silver-barked and bare, its branches arcing toward the stone ceiling like pleading arms. At its base, a small pool, perfectly still. "This is the chamber of Lethe," Hades said. "Those who drink from it forget their burdens. Have you? No, I keep them, as all kings must. And me? You may choose," he said. Persephone stepped to the edge of the pool. The water was clear, reflecting not her face but her mother's. Demeter's eyes wide with searching, her voice calling through storm and prayer. Persephone turned away. "I don't want to forget," she whispered, "not even the parts that ache." "Then you're already stronger than most who walk here," Hades replied. There was no praise in his voice, only truth and something like respect. Persephone sat beside the pool, silent. And the underworld did not rush her. It waited. Far above, in the lands of mortals and gods, the world had begun to grieve. Demeter wandered the fields like a ghost in daylight. Her golden robes dulled to ash, crops withered at her passing, and rivers slowed as though unwilling to continue without her blessing. She did not weep. She searched. She scoured the winds for her daughter's name, questioned every stream, every bird, every whisper in the leaves. The world offered no answer. In Eleusis, farmers gathered to plead for her mercy. "The barley fails," they cried. "The vines bear no fruit. We cannot survive the cold to come." Demeter turned her face from them. "Find her," she murmured. "Bring her back." When no mortal could, she climbed the steps of Olympus. Her arrival silenced the gods. Even Apollo dimmed his glow. Even Athena lowered her spear. Zeus met her on the steps. His robes shimmered, but his eyes betrayed unease. "She is gone," Demeter said. Zeus did not deny it. "You allowed this." "I allowed a choice," he replied, "one you taught her to seek. She is not ready." "Then let her become." Demeter's rage trembled the clouds. "I will tear this world apart. Then all will suffer. Then all shall." She turned from Olympus, her heart thunderous, her sorrow now woven into soil, her fury fed to the roots of trees. She would not let spring return until her daughter did. And so, across the world, seeds remained asleep. Rain turned sour. Frost clung to buds that should have bloomed. The people wept at their altars. But the goddess of growth no longer heard their prayers. Only Persephone's voice could reach her now. And Persephone had gone where no spring touched. Below, Persephone walked alone for the first time since arriving. Hades had left her in a passage of mirrors, where each reflection offered a different version of herself. The maiden she had been, the child Demeter cradled, the queen she had not yet chosen to become. She stood before the last mirror and saw herself as she was now, half in light, half in shadow, eyes open, heart uncertain, but no longer afraid. She stepped through. The mirror gave way like water, and beyond it, a garden. It was not a garden as mortals would know it. The plants here did not reach for the sun. They glowed softly from within. Their leaves were translucent, tinged with blues and silvers, as if moonlight had rooted itself in the soil. Vines curled along the ceiling like constellations, and flowers bloomed in slow motion, petals unfolding with the patience of centuries. Persephone stepped carefully, drawn to a small patch of dark earth. In it grew a single tree, no taller than her shoulder. Its bark shimmered with violet sheen. No leaves, no fruit. Yet something about it called to her. She knelt beside it and touched the soil. It was warm, alive. "Why does it not grow?" she asked aloud. "It waits for you," said Hades, his voice arriving before his figure. She turned to him. "What is it?" "A tree of choice. It bears no fruit until the one who tends it decides who they are." Persephone stood. "And if I never decide?" "Then it will remain in bloomless stillness, like many things above." She studied the branches. "What if I'm both?" He tilted his head. "Then it may bloom unlike any before." They stood in silence as the garden pulsed gently around them. Persephone turned slowly in a circle, taking it all in. The stillness, the softness, the strange peace. "This place is not what I feared," she said at last. "No," said Hades, "but it is what most avoid." "Because it asks too much?" "No," he said, "because it gives only what is earned." She looked again at the tree, and this time she saw not barrenness but potential. Snow fell on the hills of Arcadia, out of season, soft and slow. In the temples, priests burned incense that turned to ash before the prayers could rise. Bread spoiled before it baked. Women clutched swollen bellies and feared stillness. Demeter had vanished from Olympus. She walked alone across the mortal lands, her face veiled, her hands bare. Wherever her feet touched, the green of life retreated, not in anger, but in mourning. In one village she paused at a well where a child wept. "What troubles you?" Demeter asked, her voice low as winter wind. "My goat is gone," the child sobbed. "She gave us milk." Demeter knelt beside him. "Things lost do not always return the same." "But do they return?" Demeter said nothing. Instead, she took a sprig of rosemary from the child's bundle and closed it in her palm. When she opened her hand again, the sprig had withered to grey dust. The child's eyes filled with new tears. Demeter left before they fell. She crossed into wild groves and sacred woods, whispering her daughter's name through trees and root, through river and cave. But no answer came, until she arrived at a stone circle untouched by time. There, a voice called her name, not Persephone's but her own. "Hail, Demeter." Hermes stood at the edge of the stones, his winged sandals silent in the snow. "What news?" she asked, already knowing. "She's not harmed." "Where?" Hermes hesitated. "The Underworld." Demeter closed her eyes. The snow ceased. The wind paused. "She went willingly," Hermes added. "There was no theft. She was not ready. She was not helpless." Demeter turned away, the snow returning with her breath. "I want her back." Hermes did not answer. He knew the world would suffer until she did. Hermes arrived like a whisper. He stepped into the twilight garden where Persephone tended the soil near the silver tree. The bud on its branch had begun to swell, the faintest flush of colour rising in its skin. She looked up. "Hermes," she said softly, "I come with word from Olympus." She stood, brushing dust from her palms. "Your mother mourns the world," he said. "The seasons halt in her grief. Mortals suffer. Even the gods grow weary." Persephone's eyes did not flinch. "She wishes you home." Persephone looked to the garden, then to the distant hall beyond where Hades waited, still silent, still watching. "She does not know who I am now," she said. Hermes tilted his head. "And do you?" Persephone did not answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward Hades. Hermes did not follow. "I must return," she said. Hades nodded. "Will you stop me?" "No." "Will you ask me to stay?" "No," he said again. "But I will offer you this. If you eat of the underworld, even a taste, you will never fully leave. Part of you will always belong here." She stared at the table beside him. There sat a single fruit, a pomegranate, split open. Red seeds glistened like rubies. She reached forward, lifted one, then another, and ate 6. When she stepped once more into the world above, spring followed. Snow melted, fields stirred, children laughed, and Demeter, upon seeing her daughter whole, wept at last. But her joy paused when she saw the shade in Persephone's eyes. "What did you do?" "I came back," Persephone said, "but not all of you." "No," she said, "not all." Zeus appeared between them. "Then half the year she shall remain above," he declared, "and half she shall return below. Balance, compromise, but not resolution. That would come later." For Persephone had changed, and the world would learn what it meant to follow her seasons. Chapter 3. Underworld Transformation. Persephone rose with the silence of the underworld pressing gently around her. The silver tree's bud had grown in the night, its skin tight with mystery, its stem bending ever so slightly toward her touch. It hadn't bloomed, but it pulsed faintly. A heartbeat she felt more than heard. She didn't rush. The garden here asked for patience, and she had begun to understand the rhythm of waiting. Each morning she tended the soil, not out of duty, but curiosity. The earth below was different from anything she'd known above. It remembered things. When she pressed her palm to it, it responded with faint echoes, voices, laughter, even the memory of rain. Rain that hadn't touched this land in millennia, and yet the soil still held it like a secret. Persephone found she could coax vines to climb farther, leaves to unfurl just a little wider. She wasn't commanding them, she was listening, and they listened back. It wasn't power, it was dialogue. Across the garden a figure watched her quietly. Hades stood still as obsidian, not intruding, not hiding, simply present. She didn't acknowledge him at first, but after a time she turned. "You could speak." "I could," he agreed. She returned to her work. "But you don't." "I found that silence reveals more than words." Persephone smiled faintly. "Then what have I revealed?" "That you were never only a maiden," he said softly. "You were always something more." Persephone stood, brushing the soil from her hands. "Do you think you brought that out in me?" "No," Hades said. "I think you brought yourself." She walked toward him, not with hesitation, but with something new in her steps. An ease born not from confidence, but from selfhood. "I still miss the light," she said. "You carry it," he replied, and for the first time she believed him. They walked together through corridors lined with memories. Shades passed them like wind, silent, slow and soft. Persephone greeted each one with a nod. Some paused, recognizing something in her. Others simply moved on. In the chamber of echoes she heard her own voice whisper back at her, saying things she had not yet spoken. "I think I'm changing," she admitted. Hades only said, "Yes." They stood beside a gate framed by crystal vines. Beyond it lay a garden Persephone had never entered. She stepped through. The new garden was unlike any she had seen, even among the wonders of the underworld. It pulsed with slow life, a breath held between death and birth. There were no colours of the world above, no emerald leaves or golden flowers. Here, The hues were quiet, soft cobalts, dusky lavenders, and the strange pale gleam of things not yet named. At the centre stood a pool, not of water, but something clearer, something that shimmered when she thought, as though it responded to thought itself. Around it grew plants with curling tendrils, as if listening to its dreaming surface. "What is this place?" she asked. Hades answered with a distant voice, "A garden of becoming. Few are brought here." Persephone circled the pool slowly. The surface shifted beneath her reflection, not just showing her as she was, but as she had been, and could become. She saw herself laughing, alone in a field. She saw herself cloaked in midnight robes, a crown of obsidian in her hair. She saw herself walking with mortals, flowers blooming in her steps. "What am I?" she whispered. "You're not bound," Hades said, appearing beside her. "That is why you frighten Olympus." She turned. "I thought you frightened Olympus." "I frighten them because I am fixed. You unsettle them because you are still forming." She knelt beside the pool. Its surface trembled. "I don't know which path to take," she confessed. "Then don't choose yet," Hades said. "Grow." The silence between them was not absence. It was space, rich and thick as soil. Persephone stood and walked farther into the garden. There she found a corridor of trees, hollow and humming. Each tree pulsed faintly with voices. She pressed her hand to one and felt a story. A mother waiting for a child who never returned. A warrior laying down arms. A child forgiving a mistake no one else remembered. These were not her stories. But as she moved deeper, one tree called louder than the rest. Inside it, her own grief. The moment she realized her mother did not see her as separate. The moment she learned that light could blind as easily as it could guide. She stepped away, heart steady. Then came the corridor of thresholds, some open, some sealed. Each one held a version of herself behind it. She reached for one with trembling fingers and opened it. Behind the threshold was a room of wind, no walls, no floor, just a sensation of standing in a memory not yet made. Persephone closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 12 again. Running through a field, Demeter's voice calling after her, firm but warm. She remembered the way the wheat brushed her legs, how her breath caught in her throat as she ran faster, wanting not to escape, but to feel the edge of her own momentum. She turned, and her mother wasn't there, not because she was gone, because Persephone had kept running. This was the first story. The next came with a door of frost. She stepped through and saw herself on Olympus, crowned not with flowers, but fire. The gods stood in a circle. Apollo's mouth opened in protest. Hera frowned, but it was Athena who nodded. Persephone held no sceptre, no thunderbolt. But they listened when she spoke, a leader not born, but made. She stepped backward, heart thudding, not with fear, but with recognition. The third door revealed no form, only sensation. She stood at the centre of 1,000 roots, all living, all connected, each life on the surface, each death below it, woven through her breath, her heartbeat. She understood. She was not above or below. She was between. She stepped back into the corridor. The doors no longer frightened her. She moved forward, more sure now, and came to a chamber lit with hanging lanterns, each flame holding a moment. One burned with the first time she spoke aloud in the Underworld. One shimmered with a single seed, unplanted but still brimming with potential. She reached for one. It flickered, then steadied. A vision bloomed within her. She stood beside Hades, not beneath him. The throne beside his was carved with vines and moonlight, not bone or stone. Shades came to her with dreams, not regrets, and she listened, not as judge, not as queen, as witness. The lantern's light dimmed. Persephone turned to find Hades watching her again, not guiding, not waiting, witnessing. "You see now?" he asked. "I do," she said, "but I don't yet know how to hold it," he nodded. "Then you're ready." "For what?" "To begin." The next day, Persephone woke to find the silver tree in bloom. Not all at once, not in the way spring erupts across hills, but a single petal, glowing faintly, had curled open in the night. It pulsed softly with colour, neither red nor violet, but something in between. Something wholly her own. She smiled without realizing. She did not rush to touch it. Instead, she walked the length of the garden, feeling the rhythm of the place settle into her bones. Spirits passed her like whispers, and they bowed, not out of fear, not from obligation, but recognition. She was not their queen, she was their kin. Figure stepped forward from the edges of her vision. Not Hades, someone smaller, cloaked in moss and memory. "Are you the one they wait for?" the spirit asked. "I don't know," Persephone replied honestly. "They say you can grow things in places that forgot how." Persephone looked at her hands. "Perhaps." The spirit offered her a stone, small, black, cold. "A seed," it said. "What grows from it? What you're ready to let go of." Persephone held the seed a long while. Then she found a patch of earth near the tree and pressed it down into the soil. She didn't ask what would bloom. Some things need darkness first. Later she returned to the throne room, not as a guest, but as something else. Hades sat in silence, as always, but this time he stood when she entered. They did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "You changed something." She nodded. He gestured to the second throne, still carved with root and flame. "I did not build that," he said. "I know," she said. "I did." The throne shimmered with vines and soft petals. It was not a queen's chair. It was a place of listening, of nurturing, and yet it was powerful, because it asked nothing and witnessed everything. She sat. The throne did not resist her weight. It embraced it, and the underworld pulsed with quiet approval. Time in the underworld moved like deep water, slow, silent, and steady. Persephone no longer marked days by light or dark. She marked them by growth. The silver tree had unfurled more petals, and the seed she had planted near its roots began to stir. It didn't sprout upward as she expected. It burrowed deeper into the ground. She realized this was not a seed of surface things. It was one of the foundations, of integration. It would not bloom until what lay beneath was understood. She began to spend her evenings in the Hall of Echoes, not seeking answers, but listening. Shades gathered near her, not for judgment but for reflection. They told their stories in fragments, regrets, moments, names they once answered to, and she remembered them. When she returned to the garden, the silver tree shimmered with new growth. On one branch, a single fruit had formed, pale at first like moonlight in fog, but with each breath she took it deepened into dusk purple. She did not pick it. She let it hang. One evening Hades met her at the threshold of the garden. He did not speak. Instead, he extended his hand. In it, a mirror, small and round. "I thought you might want to see what's changed," he said. Persephone took it, but the mirror showed no reflection. Instead, it pulsed with voices, with laughter, with all she had encountered. The garden, the shades, the throne, the echo of herself whispering truths she didn't yet know how to hold. And then a single word emerged from the swirl of images, not spoken, written in flame. Choose. She lowered the mirror. I don't want to return to the way I was, she said. You cannot, Hades replied. The question is whether you will step forward. What if I don't know where forward leads? No one does, he said gently. That is why it's called a path. She turned to the garden one last time. The tree stood tall now. The seed was gone, fully beneath. The air shimmered with the quiet strength of something unfinished but alive. I'm ready, she whispered. And the underworld listened. Persephone stood at the threshold of her becoming. Hades waited behind her, not as a guardian or a guide, but as a witness. He knew that this step, like everyone before, belonged solely to her. The silver tree had fully bloomed now, its branches crowned with fruit that shimmered like dusk and dew. The garden breathed with her. It was no longer just the underworld's, it was hers. She reached up and gently plucked one of the fruits. Its weight was warm in her palm. She brought it to her lips but did not eat. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the place where the seed had vanished. There, the soil had cracked open, not with destruction, but with quiet birth. A new shoot had emerged. Pale and sturdy, it bore no leaves yet, but it reached downward as much as upward. A mirror tree, a memory tree. She knelt and planted the fruit. It sank into the soil like a sigh. Behind her, Hades spoke. That is not what I expected. Persephone stood. It's not for now. It's for the return. She turned to face him. Do you regret coming here? He asked. She thought a long while. No, but I regret how much I didn't know of myself before. You know now? I'm learning, she said. He bowed his head, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. She approached the mirror pool one last time. Its surface was still. When she looked into it, she saw herself not as she was, or might be, but as she chose to be. She stood alone, but not lonely, rooted, not trapped, aware of shadow, but holding light. She walked through the garden with the quiet grace of someone who had suffered, softened, and survived. As she neared the edge, she heard the winds of the upper world stirring. Hermes would come soon. The return would begin. She touched the tree one last time. Grow well, she whispered, and the leaves answered her in silence. When she stepped beyond the garden's gate, the underworld did not close behind her. It opened, not to hold her, but to remember her. For Persephone had transformed not only herself, but the realm itself, and both would never be the same. As she walked toward the exit, Persephone paused beneath an arch woven with ghostly vines. Here she closed her eyes and placed her hand over her heart. A memory surfaced, not of gods or gardens, but of a mortal girl who once believed her value was tied to pleasing others, who smiled because it was expected, who bloomed only when the sun watched. Now she understood that growth didn't require permission. It required darkness, stillness, listening. She inhaled deeply, and with that breath she forgave her past self for not knowing. She honoured her present self for enduring, and she welcomed her future self with trust. Behind her the tree rustled, not with wind, but with affirmation. Ahead the path opened, not certain, but true. Persephone stepped forward, no longer descending, no longer rising, but arriving at last. Before she reached the gate where Hermes would arrive, Persephone knelt beside the underworld stream, a narrow, whispering current that carried no reflection. She dipped her fingers in. The water was neither cold nor warm, but alive. It pulsed with memory, with stories the world above would never hear. She whispered to it, not a farewell, but a vow. I will return, not as captive, not as guest, but as self, whole, claimed, chosen. The stream shimmered in reply. Above, a breeze stirred, a wind not felt in the underworld since her arrival. It carried with it the faint scent of spring. Hermes was near. Persephone rose slowly, not with dread, not with grief, but with gravity. She had touched the heart of shadow and found her own light. Now she would rise, and the world above would bloom differently because of it, not because of what she lost, but because of what she had become. The meadow hummed with late summer stillness. After months below, Persephone stood once more in the golden light, her feet sinking into sun-warmed grass. The breeze tugged at the edges of her cloak, teasing wheat-scented threads from her hair. The cicadas welcomed her, not with fanfare but with steady rhythm, as if they'd been waiting all along. Demeter ran to her, arms outstretched, face wet with tears that were neither joy nor sorrow, but a mixture of both. Her touch was trembling, but her embrace had softened. "You've come back," she whispered, as if daring not to believe it. "I always do," Persephone murmured, resting her cheek against her mother's shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, a tree and its seed reunited. Around them, life resumed its motion. Bees returned to lavender, doves dipped to drink from the stream. Nothing paused for their reunion, and yet everything acknowledged it. Persephone walked the fields slowly in the days that followed, reacquainting herself with the textures of the living world. She placed her palms against the bark of olive trees, feeling their slow, ancient pulse. She breathed the warmth of ripening figs, watched petals stretch toward her with lazy delight. The villagers had prepared garlands in her honour, woven with marigold and fennel, but she wore none. Instead, she adorned herself with a single sprig of dried asphodel behind her ear, a remembrance of where she'd been, and a declaration that she'd returned with choice. To them she was core again, the maiden, the bloom. But within her, something deeper stirred. She'd not come back as she left. She had returned as herself, whole and no longer afraid of her shadow. The days stretched long with sunlight, but Persephone did not lose her tether to the dark. Each morning she rose before the sun and walked the gardens alone. Dew clung to her skin like memory. The birds did not startle at her passing. The flowers turned to face her before they faced the light. She paused at each sprouting vine and whispered to it, not words of command, but permission. "Grow if you choose," she would murmur. "Sleep if you must." There was strength in release, she had learned. The underworld taught that. Growth was not always up. Sometimes it burrowed down. She tended the roots of fig trees, pressing her palms into the soil, remembering the weight of silence and stillness. She scattered ash from her own hearth at the base of rose bushes, knowing that even what is burned has something to offer. Demeter watched her daughter with a wary hope. She no longer begged Persephone to remain through the winter. She no longer forbade mention of Hades. But when Persephone sang to the shadows, Demeter turned her face. "She sings his name," she once said. "No," Hecate corrected, "she sings her own." At night, Persephone wrote on scrolls made of bark and thread. Not poetry, not prophecy, just recollections. What she saw in the eyes of the newly dead. What she learned from the quiet corners of her own soul. She folded each scroll and buried it in the garden, one for every moon cycle. They were never found. But the plants above them grew tall and strange. Flowers with petals the colour of dusk, vines that glowed slightly in the dark. and still she whispered to each, "Sleep if you must. Rise when you're ready." When the leaves began to curl at their edges and the wind carried the first chill of autumn, Persephone stood at the threshold of the meadow where it all began. The same earth, the same air. But she was no longer the same. Demeter met her there, eyes already brimming but not pleading. "Must you go?" she asked softly. "I must," Persephone said. "Not because I'm summoned, because I belong." Demeter nodded, the ache in her smile softened by understanding. "Then return to me when the crocuses bloom. I will, and when I do, I will not be less than I was. I will be more." The two embraced, not in goodbye, but in recognition. And then Persephone turned south, where shadows lengthened and the light bowed low. She walked barefoot, her dress of woven wheat unravelling thread by thread, until only shadow clung to her skin. Birds did not follow, trees did not speak, but the ground welcomed her back. Each step she took stirred memories in the soil, her laughter as a child, her tears as a bride, her silence as a queen. The earth knew her now, not as visitor, as root. The gates of the underworld opened before her, not with thunder, but with a hush, like a breath held in reverence. Hades stood waiting, not on a throne, but in the garden of silver leaves. "You came," he said. "I chose," she replied. He did not smile, but something in him softened. "Much has waited," he said, "and much has grown," she answered. Together they walked the garden's path, the trees bowing ever so slightly as they passed. The silver tree, the one she had touched in uncertainty, was now crowned with crimson leaves and small round fruit. She stopped beneath it. "It bloomed," she whispered. "It followed you," Hades said. Persephone reached up and touched a single fruit. It was warm. She plucked it, held it, but did not eat. "I bring this to the world above," she said. "Let them see what the dark can grow." And Hades, god of shadows, nodded. In this garden, they were not lord and guest. They were roots entwined. Time passed differently below. She walked barefoot along obsidian rivers and learned the language of stones. She listened to the songs of the dead, helped carry the weight of stories unspoken. She wandered through halls of memory, leaving seeds where sorrow had silenced beauty. She painted constellations onto the cave walls with crushed moonflower and dust. She coaxed tears from dry earth and turned them into crystals, small and clear and humming with remembrance. And when it was time, the ground warmed. The fruit she'd plucked now held seeds of gold. She rose once more, and spring rose with her. The return of Persephone was never loud. It arrived in subtle ways, a crocus blooming through frost, a mother's laugh after long silence, a warm breeze curling around a sleeping orchard, a dream that lingered in the morning with the taste of forgotten sweetness. She walked again among mortals, not as saviour, but as reminder, that what falls may rise, that what dies may feed, that what is lost may return transformed. Children ran beside her, gathering petals in their hands. Elders left chairs open in their circles, offering her a place by the fire. Artists carved her likeness into stone, not as maiden, not as queen, but as the curve of a seed sprouting from soil. In every festival, a whisper of her name passed between lips like incense, and every whisper was different. Persephone, Proserpina, Kor, the Turning One. She was no longer just a story, she was a season, she was a lawyer, she was a promise. Above, the gods watched. Apollo tracked her movement in the tilt of the sun. Artemis wove her name into the patterns of moonlit leaves. Even Hermes, swift-footed and silver-tongued, paused at thresholds to feel where she had passed. "She has changed the path," he said once. "Now others may walk it." And they did. Not in body perhaps, but in spirit. Every soul who braved darkness to return with new truth. Every artist who descended into silence and emerged with vision. Every grieving heart that learned to beat again, followed her footprints. She was the guide not of the dead, but of becoming. She was the patron of return, and in this, her power grew, not as dominion, but as devotion. Not through fear, but through familiarity. Demeter too had changed. She still wept in winter, but not in despair. Now her tears fed the soil. She no longer clung to her daughter's skirts in spring. She no longer cursed the dark. Instead, she planted fruit trees with Persephone's seeds and waited. Because she now knew that love does not mean keeping. Love means trusting the return. She spoke often to the trees, telling them stories of her daughter's laughter as a child, her strength as a queen, and when the wind passed through the orchard it carried those stories like pollen. In quiet corners of temples and beside hearths, women lit candles to her name, not in fear of the dark, but in gratitude for its wisdom. They whispered prayers not for rescue, but for remembering, for strength in surrender, for peace in change. They braided vines into their hair and painted small red seeds onto their palms. They carved her sigil into stones and placed them under their pillows. And as the earth turned, as it always does, Persephone walked with it, not ahead, not behind, but in rhythm, in balance, and ever becoming. There is a place, it is said, between root and bloom, between dusk and dawn, where stories linger. In that place walks Persephone, not as a queen in a throne room or a maiden in a field, but as herself, whole and unhurried. She walks slowly there, trailing her fingers along walls made of memory. Her breath smells of pomegranate and wet stone. Her eyes hold the stillness of stars before they blink awake. Sometimes a soul finds her there, not the dead but the drifting, those who have lost their name in grief, those whose songs have gone silent, those curled at the edge of becoming. She does not speak first, she listens, and when she speaks it is not to command, but to remind. "You're not broken," she says, "you're ripening." And slowly, like sap rising in spring, something stirs in the lost. They begin again. She has no temple of marble. Her altar is the quiet moment before a choice, the pause before forgiveness, the silence at the end of a long exhale. She's found not in thunder, but in the spaces in between, the doorway left ajar, the breath between sob and smile, the shadow that does not threaten, but waits, the dream remembered without sound, the moment of stillness before waking. In the world above, mortals mark her passage with candles, festivals, stories told by firelight. But the true altar is quieter. It is the mother letting go, the artist daring to rest, the healer tending their own wound. These are her worshippers, these are her kin. Once a child asked her why she left each year. "To return," she said. "But why return at all?" Persephone smiled. "Because some seeds need the dark to grow." The child nodded, though they did not yet understand. One day they would, and in their own way they too would descend and rise again, and so the wheel turns, spring to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter, winter to the breath before bloom. And at every crossing her footfall echoes, not as thunder, but as heartbeat, software steady, eternal. So if tonight you find yourself between one thing and another, between who you were and who you are becoming, between the kick of loss and the first glimmer of peace, close your eyes, take a breath, and listen. Somewhere beneath the soil she's whispering your name. You are not lost. You are becoming.